In this video, I'm going to be reacting to a TED Talk by Professor Scott Galloway from NYU.
Start us with a question. Do we love our children? Sounds like an illegitimate question, right? Well, I'm going to try and convince you otherwise. Essentially, as we go down generations, we're seeing that for the last 2 generations, people are making less money on an inflation-adjusted basis. In addition, the cost of buying a home, the cost of pursuing education continues to skyrocket. So the purchasing power, the prosperity, is inversely correlated to age. Simply put, as we get younger, we're taking away opportunity and prosperity from our youngest. The social contract that is now no longer in place, and for the first time in the US's history, a 30-year-old is no longer doing as well as his or her parents were at 30. This is a breakdown in the fundamental agreement we have with any society, and it creates rage and shame. As a result, people over the age of 55 feel pretty good about America, but less than 1 in 5 people under the age of 34 feel very good about America. This creates an incendiary. Righteous movements, cuts to our society end up becoming opportunistic infections because generally speaking, young people have a warranted envy, they're pissed off, and they're angry that they don't enjoy the same spoils and prosperity that were provided to our generation.
This is true.
A decent proxy for how much we value youth labor is minimum wage, and we've kept it purposely pretty low. If it had just kept pace with productivity, it'd be about $23 a share, but we've decided to purposely keep it low.
So I don't think that this is fair to say that minimum wage should increase with productivity, because the type of work that's done by minimum wage workers, it's not leveraging new technology and the things that have caused productivity to go up. It wouldn't make sense economically for the minimum wage to increase along with that. Now, if you'll notice here, it does stay flat, which I think is interesting. But if you look at minimum wage now and what happens when you raise it, what it generally does, instead of raising the income of minimum wage workers, it usually actually eliminates those jobs and sends them either overseas, or businesses will use new technology to replace the need for minimum wage workers because they're more expensive.
Bucks a share, but we've decided to purposely keep it low. Out of reach, median home price has skyrocketed relative to median household income. As a result, pre-pandemic, the average mortgage payment was $1,100. It's now $2,300 because of an acceleration in interest rates and the fact that the average home has gone from $290,000 to $420,000. By the way, the most expensive homes in the world, based on this metric, are number 3, Vancouver. Why? Because 60% of the cost of building a home goes to permits. Because guess what? The incumbents that own assets have weaponized government to make it very difficult for new entrants to ever get their own assets, thereby elevating their own net worth. This is the transfer I'm going to be speaking about. This has resulted in an enormous transfer of wealth, where people over the age of 70 used to control 19% of household income, versus people under the age of 40 used to control 12. Their wealth has been cut in half. This isn't by accident.
So this is problematic for me, because the number of people under 40 has vastly gone down since 1989. And so if you want to get a better idea of the transfer of wealth, what you should actually do instead is, doing it by percentage of wealth. You should do it in a way that reflects the average or median income for people in these age groups. Because what this doesn't account for is the baby boomer generation and how the fertility rate has gone down since then. Now, there are much less people under the age of 40 than there were then. And so, in my mind, a reduction of 42% in the amount of wealth held by the people in this category, that is reasonable. And I don't think that that would suggest that money is shifting or that there's something wrong here.
It's purposeful. This is me at UCLA in 1987. I know your first thought is I haven't changed a bit. This is also Mia Silverio, who is the analyst who put together these slides. By the way, Mia is 26. I did the math. Just by virtue of her being in this audience, it brings the average age of the entire conference down 11 days. When I applied to UCLA, the admissions rate was 76%. Today, it's 9%. I received a 2.23 GPA from UCLA. I learned nothing but how to make bombs out of household items in every line from Planet of the Apes. And the greatest public school in the world, Berkeley, decided to let me in with a 2.27 GPA. And that's what higher ed is about. Higher ed is about taking unremarkable kids and giving them a shot at being remarkable.
Yeah, that's been true historically.
And every year, it's gotten more expensive.
That's true.
Higher ed and homes, and the ability, not only is higher ed incredibly expensive, it's not accessible, because me and my colleagues are drunk on luxury, and I'll come back to that. We've embraced the ultimate strategy. Me and my colleagues in higher ed wake up every morning and ask ourselves the same question when we look in the mirror. How can I increase my compensation while reducing my accountability? And we have found the ultimate strategy. It's called an LVMH strategy, where we artificially constrain supply to create aspiration and scarcity such that we can raise tuition faster than inflation. And old people and wealthy people have something.
I disagree with the scarcity part.
Housing. All of a sudden, once you own a home, you become very concerned with traffic, and you make sure that there's no new housing permits. And here is a memo to my colleagues in higher ed. We're public servants, not Chanel bags. Harvard is the best example of this. They've increased their endowment in the last 40 years and have decided to expand their enrollment, their freshman class, by 4%.
Yeah, Harvard actually has, I think, $50 billion in their endowment.
Any university that doesn't grow their freshman class faster than population, that has over $1 billion in endowment, should lose their tax-free status because they're no longer in higher education. They're a hedge fund offering classes.
I think that universities should not always be able to have a nonprofit status, because they're basically become hedge funds with classes, like you said.
My first recommendation: Biden should take some of that $750 billion earmarked to bail out the 1/3 of people that got to go to college on the backs of the 2/3 that didn't, and give $1 billion to our 500 greatest public institutions, size adjusted, in exchange for three things. One, they use technology and scale to reduce tuition by 2% a year, expand enrollments by 6% a year, and increase the number of vocational certifications and non-traditional four-year degrees by 20%. Where does that get us? And just
See, I don't think that would. More money is obviously not the solution here, because these institutions have plenty of money. And so in order for them to change, they need to lose the money that they've been getting. And we've kind of been seeing that with a lot of donors dropping out from Harvard, and the enrollment rate going down for a lot of these public schools, where kids nowadays are not always going to college. They're getting education from different places like YouTube or apprenticeships. There's a lot of other options now than just going to college.
10 years, in just 10 years, that doubles the freshman seats and cuts the cost in half. This isn't radical. This is called college in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, but see, in 10 years, the rate of technology growth and content online, college is going to be very close to being completely obsolete. And, exceptions to that might be medical programs or things where major oversight is needed to ensure that people going through the programs are getting the education they need in order to safely do their jobs. Things are vastly different right now than they were in the 80s and 90s. And I don't think that going back to a place of where colleges are in the 80s and 90s would be enough to make them competitive, because now the cost to teach at scale is zero, whereas back then you needed a lot of money and you needed a physical building to teach students. And so all of the teachers flocked to universities, and that's how we ended up with our modern university system, because it was a place where society could go to get educated and educate others. And for students, it makes a lot less sense, because there are these teachers who are going outside of universities, and we are able to learn from them for free. So I disagree with the premise here.
Another transfer of wealth. Look at what's happened to wages. Oh, they've gone up, not as much as corporate profits.
Okay.
There's a healthy tension between capital and labor.
Okay, so here we go. There are a lot of issues with this. First of all, if you'll notice here, the major departure here happens right after 2000, which at that point, that was when the internet was introduced. And so a lot of these businesses here, I'm sure, their profits grew as a result of having the internet. And so I'm not sure what point he's making here, because the increase in profits is from the internet. And the business is always shouldering the risk, which is why they get all the profits. And for anybody upset about the discrepancy, you have the option to buy stock in these businesses. And so to me, this is not an indicator of anything unfair, because everybody who has, just a couple of bucks can jump from the purple to the green line.
For profits, there's a healthy tension between capital and labor. For the last 40 years, capital has been kicking the shit out of labor. Well, you think, whoa, what about wages, right? They've gone up. Well, if you compare them to the S&P, they barely register. It's been an amazing time to own assets, but your attempt to get the certification or the income such that you can acquire assets has gotten harder and harder. In my class of 300 kids, it's never been easier to be a billionaire. It's never been harder to be a millionaire. By the way, our job in higher ed isn't to identify a top 1% of people who are freakishly remarkable or have rich parents and turn them into a superclass of billionaires. It's to give the bottom 90 a chance to be in the top 10. You know who doesn't need me or higher education? The top 10%. The whole point of higher ed is to give the unremarkables, i.e. yours truly, who was raised by a single immigrant mother, a shot of being remarkable.
Okay, he's insinuating that it's becoming harder and harder to get ahead. The problem here with Scott, we're in a major transitional period where if you are focused on owning your house outright and having a 9-to-5 job, you're going to miss a lot of what's happening right now. And with developments in tech and more money flowing into the markets, these things, buying a house and getting a job are harder to do. But what he's not acknowledging is that if you don't limit yourself to becoming wealthy by buying your own home, getting a college degree, getting a conventional 9-to-5 job, then you will realize that it's actually easier than ever to get ahead for everybody and live a life of luxury that they would have never even dreamed of in the 80s and 90s. The fact that I can, for a half an hour of minimum wage work, order food and have it at my door in a few hours, 50 years ago, that would have probably cost 8 or 9 hours of minimum wage work. And so I just don't think it makes sense to focus on things like the cost of owning a home and how easy or hard it is to get a conventional job now, because that's such a limited way to look at what it takes to become wealthy that it doesn't capture the whole story.
The transfer has been purposeful. While the cohorts, corporations, and the ultra-wealthy continue to garner more and more of our wealth, we have decided, if they win the gold, let's give them the silver and the bronze and let's lower their taxes. This transfer is purposeful. It's not by accident. And it works. Senior poverty is way down, and we should celebrate that. Meanwhile, child poverty is flat to up.
So that's an interesting metric he threw in there. If you look, it's not even really going up. It's going up in the last 10 years, but I'm not sure why he would use this as an indicator of increasing child poverty.
The third rail, I'm going to talk about Social Security. It would cost $11 billion to expand the child tax credit, but that got stripped out of the infrastructure bill. But the additional $135 billion a year to Social Security, that flies right through Congress. And every year we transfer $1.4 trillion from a cohort that is increasingly doing less well to the cohort that is the wealthiest cohort in the history of this planet.
Yeah, I agree with this.
I'm not against Social Security, but the criteria should be if you need it, not whether you have a catheter. 80% of you have absolutely no reason to ever take Social Security. It is bankrupting our nation, and we have fallen under this mythology that somehow it's this great social program. No, it's not. It's the great transfer of wealth from young to old. How is this happening? Because our representatives are in fact representative. Old people vote. Washington has become a cross between the land of the dead and the Golden Girls. Quite frankly, this is ridiculous. And if I sound ageist, I am. And you know who else is ageist? Biology. When Speaker Pelosi had her first child, get this, 2/3 of households didn't have color televisions, and Castro had just declared martial law. But she's supposed to understand the challenges of a 17-year-old girl who's 5'9", 95 pounds, getting tips on dieting and extreme dieting from Facebook. She's supposed to understand the challenges that a 27-year-old single mother face. By the way, young and dreamy. Young and dreamy. The great intergenerational theft took place under the auspices of a virus. I know. Let's use the greatest health crisis in the century to really speedball the transfer. This is the NASDAQ from 2008 to 2012. We let the markets crash. And by the way, you need churn, you need disruption, because it seeds and recalibrates advantage and wealth from the incumbents to the entrants. It's a natural part of the cycle. But wait, lately, no, 1 million people dying would be bad, but what would be tragic is if we let the NASDAQ go down and guys like me lost wealth. So we pumped the economy, which again increased the massive transfer of wealth. The best 2 years of
who was that supposed to benefit? That was supposed to benefit all the people at the bottom. So you can't be upset that all that money flew to the corporations and business owners, because it went directly to the people at the very bottom. So if this isn't going to work, then I don't know what else is going to work, other than if you could somehow magically change the way that these people act.
My life, COVID, more time with my kids, more time with Netflix, and my value of my stocks absolutely exploded. Mm-hmm. And who has to pay for my prosperity? Not me. Future generations who will have to deal with an unprecedented level of debt.
True, yeah, that's true.
Why am I here, and why do I get the prosperity I enjoyed? Because in 2008, we bailed out the banks, but we didn't bail out the economy. We let the markets fall. So as I was coming into my prime income earning years, I got to buy, no joke, these stocks at these prices. This is where those stocks are now. Where does a young person find disruption?
Yeah.
When you bail out the baby...
Well, back then you didn't know. You couldn't tell the future. Just
where
like
does
you
a young...
can't tell the future now. This idea that there's no opportunity now. I mean, look at Bitcoin. They didn't have a 10,000 price increase in anything in 2008, or even Nvidia. This argument that there's no more opportunity, that doesn't make any sense. Young person find disruption. When you bail out the baby boomer owner of a restaurant, all you're doing is robbing opportunity from the 26-year-old graduate of a culinary academy. This is true. Bailing out businesses, and I think one of the biggest examples of this would be the auto industry. When you bail out a business, you're preventing efficiency. Businesses, if they can't make it on their own, then they need to fail, because they'll be replaced by businesses who are more efficient. And that in turn is going to benefit the consumer and reduce inflation by bringing the cost of goods down.
That wants her shot. We need disruption. We're economically attacking the young, but I know, let's attack their emotional and mental well-being. Let's take advantage of the fact of the flaws in our species with medieval institutions, Paleolithic instincts, and godlike technology. I'm just going to say, I think Mark Zuckerberg has done more damage to young people in our nation while making more money than any person in history.
You could argue that, but...
Oh, but wait, what could be worse? It's as if we let an adversary implant a neural jack into our youth to raise a generation of civic, military, and business leaders that hate America. How can we be this stupid? All right, this all adds up to a bunch of graphs all headed up and to the right. And what are they? What's the first one? Oh, that's self-harm rates, which have exploded, especially among girls, since my colleague Jonathan Haidt pointed out it's really gone crazy since social went on mobile. What's the next one? Teens with depression. The next one, men and women not having sex. Biggest fear of my parents was that I was going to get in too much trouble. My biggest fear, honestly, is that my kids aren't going to get into enough trouble. By the way, my advice to every young person watching this program is go out, drink more, and make a series of bad decisions that might pay off. Next graph, cumulative gun deaths. You're more likely to be shot in the United States if you're a toddler or an infant than a cop. Next graph, obesity, way up. By the way, the industrial food complex wants to addict you to fatty food so they can hand you over to the industrial diabetes complex. We should not romanticize obesity. You're not finding your truth, you're finding diabetes.
Yeah, but whose fault is that? That's the consumer incentivizing the food companies to make more fattening foods that taste better.
Overdose deaths, way up. Deaths of despair. When I was in high school, it was drunk driving. Now it's kids killing themselves. Young people don't want to have kids anymore. 2/3 of people aged 30 to 34 able-bodied used to decide to have at least one child. It's been cut in half. It's now less than a third, 27%. As a result, people over the age of 60 in the US, pretty happy. People under the age of 30, not so much. Some of the lowest in the free world. What can we do? Nothing wrong with America that can't be fixed with what's right with it. We got the hard stuff figured out. There are programs to address all of these issues that cost a lot of money. That's the hard part. And we have figured this out. In just 5 minutes post an earnings call, we can add $250 billion to the economy. We've got the hard part figured out, the resources. We have the money, but we decide not to do it. This is per capita spending on childcare in the United States relative to other nations. This is housing permits.
Yeah, I bet if you compared this to the tax rates, it would also, this would correlate to the nations that have higher taxes. I know off the top of my head, Norway, Iceland, Finland, those are all 50+% tax. And so you can move there, but what you have to decide is if you want to pay 50% tax and have all these benefits, or if you want to live in the US, pay a much lower tax rate and have less government benefits.
Things are doable. We increase minimum wage to $25 an hour. It goes into the economy.
No.
The wonderful things about low and middle income households is they spend all their money. We have to have a restore or a progressive tax structure.
That's also contradicting what he said earlier.
Structure with alternative minimum tax on corporations and wealthy individuals. We need to refund the IRS. We need to reform Social Security. It should be based on whether you need the money, not on how old you are. We need a negative income tax. My friend Andrew Yang screwed up a great idea, but he branded it incorrectly. Instead of calling it UBI, he should have got Republicans on board by calling it a negative income tax. We need to eliminate the capital gains tax deduction. When did we decide that the money that capital earns is more noble than the money that sweat earns? Shouldn't it be flipped?
See, but the thing about this is everybody has the option to structure their income in a way that they benefit from this. And if you don't even make enough where capital gains tax is less than your income tax, then I don't understand why this is an issue.
We need to remove 230 protection for all algorithmically elevated content. We need identity verification. The reason we can have identity verification is because we have a First Amendment. Break up big tech. We have monopolies that are incurring greater and greater costs on every small business and parents because, again, see above, our representatives don't understand these technologies. We need to age gate social media. There's absolutely no reason anyone under the age of 16 should ever be on social media. We need universal pre-K. We need to reinstate the expanded child tax credit. We need term limits, see above Andrew Yang. We need income-based affirmative action. Any visible signs of affirmative action make no sense at all. You would rather be born gay or non-white in the United States today than poor, and that's a sign of our progress and our need to recalibrate who we give advantage to. Affirmative action, of which I'm a beneficiary of, I got Pell Grants, I got unfair advantage. Affirmative action is a wonderful thing, and it should be based on color. It should be based on green, how much money you have or don't have. Expand college enrollment and vocational programs, mental health, ban phones in schools, invest in third places, big brothers and sisters programs. We need national service. We need to tell people in the United States and Canada that they live in the greatest countries in the world, and we need to remind them of that every day by exposing them to other great Americans where they feel connected tissue. We can do all of this. We can do all of it. We have the resources. The question is, do we have the will? This is my last slide. It is an emotionally manipulative slide to try and get you to like me more.
Yeah, so the problem with this TED Talk is that I don't think that what he's saying is necessarily true. There are ways that the system is taking money from young people and giving it to old, and the best way that he highlighted that was in the Social Security. But I think in general, what he's missing is a couple things. The first thing he's missing is the fact that anybody can own capital. Anybody can become a business owner, whether that's through buying stock or by starting your own business. I remember in 2013 and 2014, when I got into the stock market, you used to need to have $500 as a minimum for your account balance. And now you can invest with different stock apps for just a couple of bucks. So there's really no excuses for anybody who complain about all of the profits going to big corporations, because you can be a part of a big corporation for just a couple of bucks. So that's not valid. And then the other thing I think he's missing is the cyclical nature of some of these trends. Like, for example, the fertility rate thing. It's obvious that that is what is causing the majority of the wealth to go to older people right now. It's just because there are a lot more older people than younger people. As we cycle back, because I think we will, you generally over time, these things cycle to where people start having more kids, then there might be a day where the percentage of wealth for people under 40, where that number goes back up because of the increased number of total people under 40. And I think that seemed to be the base of what he was basing this argument off of, when I think he should have normalized that to median net worth, actually. And then lastly, I just don't think it's helpful to think this way as a young person. If you think that everything's going to be hard and that you can't get ahead, then if there is an opportunity for you to actually get ahead, you're going to completely miss it.